Hey crew, we talk about is Pokemon in a junk wax era in this episode, and
we also discuss whether serialized cards are the future of Pokemon trading card game.
Guys, Gray has black back-end information.
I think the American business are a bunch of greedy dirtbags.
Pokemon is in a junk wax era right now. Hello, beautiful people. Captain Zack Sparrow here. We're here with episode number dos, and we have my friend
Gray from Pokemon Buyers Club. Zack and I have a topic that we want to discuss today, and it is going to be serialized cards in Pokemon. This is not a new topic. People have been talking about this for years, ever since Magic started dabbling in it. But most recently with the Lord of the Rings set, I think there's a lot to talk about this format and whether it makes sense for Pokemon. We both have been thinking about it on our own. We've got some hot takes. We're going to share our positions. Neither of us know what the other is about to say, and then we're going to talk about it. I'll kick it off. I've been thinking about this a lot, and I hate the idea of serialized cards in Pokemon, but I think it might work, and I'm a little uneasy about it, but after watching what happened with Lord of the Rings, maybe it's not as bad as I think. So that's where I'm going. I hate it, but I think it might work.
I feel like it's a matter of time. I talked about this on the channel, I don't know, a while ago now, and I feel like it's inevitable. I mean, you see it across sports cards, and now we see it in Magic. It's going to be interesting to see what Magic does moving forward. If there's going to be successive one-of-ones. And I mean, the first one of one, will that be the most prominent? But it's also a Lord of the Rings card, so which I understand is hot, and like people who even aren't interested in Magic the Gathering would like that. Like I myself, like I'm not heavy into Magic, but I do like that. I'm like, ooh, Lord of the Rings. So I don't know. It's weird. Like, if they have like, I don't know, some sort of weird one-of-one Lotus, where does that go? Where does that fall? I don't know. I feel like I'm rambling, but does that jive with you?
Well, what I want to know is what's your hot take?
I think Pokemon is in a junk wax era right now. And I think that's a pretty hot take for the community.
I think that's a hot take.
Yeah. I like where Pokemon's going with these alternate arts. I love that. I get it. But let's say it's just the coolest thing on the planet, and everyone loves it. And people who weren't interested in Pokemon are gravitating toward Pokemon now because they love the alternate arts. Does that excuse the abundance of cards that we're seeing lately? And I'm not saying it's so extreme to where we'll just see total collapse across the game. I don't necessarily anticipate that. But I do think it's getting pretty hot and heavy right now. What do you think?
So I don't agree. I don't think we're in a junk wax era. I do think we're in an era of abundance of really, really good stuff. And so I don't know what that means in terms of long-term values of cards. Like, we have some of the most beautiful and exceptional artwork in cards that we've ever seen, and they are incredibly abundant, like so relatively easy to pull, readily available. And there is definitely an argument that when everything is amazing, nothing is amazing. But the flip side of it to me is I think everyone loves different things out of Pokemon, and everyone loves different Pokemon. I think that over time, like if you're a Wiglet fan, and I'm calling out Wiglet from the new Pokemon Scarlet and Violet games because I pulled the illustration rare from an ETB I opened over the weekend. And I don't care at all about Wiglet, but this card is gorgeous. It's so nice. And like, someone's going to love Wiglet, and they're going to see this card exists, and they're going to want it. But is it going to be worth more than like $10 ever? I have no idea. And I think maybe that's where you're calling it junk wax, and I'm refusing to give it that label, but acknowledging the market forces at play.
Yeah. So, well, I guess my question would be, where would we have to be, or what would have to happen for you to be like, yep, we're in a junk wax era? So, like, obviously exaggerating makes it easy to make a point. Like, for example, if we saw, I don't know, 100 times the product that we see on the market right now, everyone, I would think, anyone's reasonable would think, hey, we're in a junk wax era. So I think it's a bit subjective in that because we don't have hard data of here are exactly how many ETBs we have here exactly we can get a good idea and guesstimates and that sort of deal. But yeah, I guess that's a question. What do you think you would need to see to be like it's getting a little junky?
I think the supply needs to more drastically exceed the demand, and I think that that's unlikely to do in the context of a single business manufacturing all of the product versus competing businesses like in sports cards when they hit their junk wax era, all trying to pump out cards with the same characters but slightly different designs and treatments. That's my feel. I think the closest Pokemon's ever been to a junk wax era that I've experienced, and I experienced at the tail end when it was past this, but feels like it was the evolutions into Sun and Moon base set, where the production volumes were enormous and they were printing for a demand that just went away somewhat quickly after the sort of 2016 boom. And I'm mostly aware of this because when I got into the hobby in 2020, Sun and Moon booster packs were in everything, despite being, a 4-year-old set at the time. And I kept wondering, like, why are these booster packs still in new products? And it took me a while to understand what had actually transpired. That was pretty close, but even that kind of recovered. It wasn't like the supply wasn't so overwhelming that it persisted forever. And some of the products that were victims of that era, especially evolutions, but also to a degree, the Sun and Moon base set, have recovered somewhat. Just took them a really long time. And I don't think we're in that same space here, but that assumes that the demand doesn't shrink too much. I think the market and the hobby has a lot of room for demand to shrink without drastic long-term impacts. But, you can't have 80% of the people stop buying all of a sudden, And if that happened, like the volumes that they're producing are obviously high, and we haven't really seen the full force of that in the Scarlet and Violet era just yet. I don't think there's obviously a lot of Scarlet and Violet and Paldea Evolved. It's unclear that they're going to completely overproduce in a way that they may have done in the past just yet, and I don't think they've done that at all sort of through this latest boom and through these market moves. So we'll see.
I'll have that kind of stew, I think, for a little bit, like while I
Sure.
think about like my opinion around that. There are some things that I agree with, and then there are other things too that I think are good questions that I feel like some people might not be considering, or just maybe people aren't. I don't want to say aware of, but I don't know. I wanna unpack this and like be like, okay, where do we draw this line? But yeah, I feel like we can talk about what's it called, serialized stuff.
Let's do it.
If we do see that, is it okay for us to speculate for a second and assume it would be a big card that would be one of one? Like we're not going to see a a one of one Crabominable, or are we? I would think it would be a one of one of the original Pokemon.
Right.
I would assume.
You got to figure the first one. If they did it, the first serialized card is probably going to be a fan favorite. It's probably going to be a Charizard or a Pikachu.
Do you think Greninja would be up there when like people at some point were polled what their favorite Pokemon was and Greninja won?
I remember that. That was surprising. Potentially. I don't think in the first wave, but I think Greninja is a top tier Pokemon that is a candidate for that kind of treatment. The other thing I'll say is if Pokemon were to print serialized cards, I do think they would print a somewhat substantial number. I'd be surprised to ever see a one of one, but maybe they do like serialized out of 100 or even 1,000 or more. I'm not sure. And I'm also not sure they're going to do it. This is my pure speculation on what is happening right now. I did a little bit of research on this, and gambling in Japan has been illegal for a very long time. I gather that might be changing a little bit, but there is a bit of a cultural taboo towards gambling. It is not widespread. They have many types of games and things that are gambling-like, and Pokemon is arguably already gambling-like when you open packs, and they're quite popular. But just casinos don't exist. And so from that, I feel like gambling is something they're kind of aware of, and probably there is some amount of line that separates like when is Pokemon actually gambling. I think what we saw with Magic and the Lord of the Rings set is turning that hobby into a lottery and like straight gambling. And I think there might be some aversion to that across the Japanese business. So that's where I'm purely speculating their stances. Meanwhile, I think the American business are a bunch of greedy dirtbags, and they're going, we need to do serialized cards. We need to do serialized cards. And they're pushing for it. I don't think the American business does it without the Japanese business doing it. This is all rampant speculation. But that's my take. And so with that in mind, I think if they do it very softly. They may be serialized cards, but there's a lot of them. They might be an alternate art version of a card, but maybe they're like there's only 100 of this art that is printed and they're all serialized, or maybe they literally just stamp a serial number on like an otherwise rare alt art card to add that extra layer of like chase to a set. I don't know, but that's what I think. This is my fun speculative take. None of this could be happening whatsoever. I just try to figure out how it might happen if it does, and I would imagine it's something along those lines, and I think it has to be driven by the Japanese business, who I think would be more resistant to it than the North American business, who I would imagine is more eager to pursue what they probably view as a huge market opportunity after what we've seen in Magic.
So let's just splice this into the beginning here. Mm-hmm. Guys, Gray has black back-end information, and he guarantees we're going to...
My insider info is just my conspiracy brain.
Yeah, so there's quite a bit to unpack there. So while you mentioned for the serialized cards, like what it would look like, whether it's 1 of 100, 1 of 1, whatever the case, it doesn't matter if it's serialized. That again, like brings up like what I was thinking before of how are cards in general going to look like long-term, like 20 plus years from now, with the manufactured, like additionally manufactured scarcity. For example, the Pokemon Company is already printing a certain number of cards, even though it is a lot of cards. It's a limited amount, air quotes. But if they, have 1 of 10, for, I don't know, some sort of Raichu card, and will that perform better than, I don't know, a base set Raichu card? Right. Why or why not? Just because it's that manufactured scarcity. And then it goes into the whole, should we have graded cards or not? Like, should we, grade with PSA? Does that warrant the additional premiums that we pay across the board? Does the black label, are those priced appropriately? Like, again, 20 plus years from now, I'm not talking about like the last few years or something. Like, what does that actually look like long-term, 20 years, 30 years from now? When most people listening to this, I think analytics is like somewhere like basically 25 to 40-year-olds. That's who's watching these kind of channels. When we're all older and grayer, what will it actually look like? At that point, I would think if we're in a bubble, which I do think Modern's a bit in a bubble right now, whether people think it is or not, that would give us enough time to where we should see, again, air quotes, the bubble pop. But I said a lot there, and I feel like maybe you have something around that.
I don't know, I think we're what's fun in this episode is we're speculating around some really massive ideas that tons of people have. And it's really hard to say what's going to happen. Is Modern a bubble? I think there's an argument that it is very kind of inflated. There's a lot of attention on it, which I think gives a lot of potential for the bubble. But in order for it to be a bubble, it has to be that the predominant market force is people buying because they think it's going to be worth more in the future. And I don't know if that's true. Like, I know there's a lot of that in the collector investor space and in the YouTube commentary space. There's a lot of people who will be speaking to that capacity. My feeling is that there's just a ton of people who really want this stuff, and they just want it because they want it. They want to collect it. They want to open it. I have no data to back that up. That's just my gut feeling. I have friends with kids, and I know a lot of their kids or their kids' friends are super into Pokemon right now. It feels, from a very outsider's perspective, like there is a lot of organic underlying demand, and there are a lot of similarities to the experience I had growing up when all of my friends were collecting, and it was kind of the thing at school that everyone talked about. So I don't know. I think that's a good sign, but it's also obviously more people participating in the hobby than ever before, the most demand than ever before, and it's unclear how sticky or firm that demand is and how likely it is to go away if the market changes. And as much as people want collectors to be collectors and really just focused on owning the things they love, there is this monetary component to it that I think is a little bit inevitable. And if the market were to sway and prices are tanking, that can piss people off and leave a sour taste in their mouth, and people do leave, right? I do think with Magic, to tie back the 101 and the market bubble, I do feel like the Lord of the Rings 1/1 card was a bit of a Hail Mary to recreate some demand in a collapsing market for them. And it works super well. I don't know if that's just a short-term gimmick or if they can maintain it long-term. And you've got to figure at some point there's a fatiguing element if every new set has a special 1/1 card or something. Like how many people are going to keep chasing that 1/1? Like the first one, the tie into Lord of the Rings was brilliant. The One Ring being such a staple of the Lord of the Rings lore made so much sense in the set. It was really, really clever. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they knocked it out of the park. I'm not sure that bodes well for the future of this type of strategy for them, but I don't know. I'm not a Magic collector or player anymore, so I'm not as attuned to that market as some others might be. And I will say, when everything seemed to be blowing up from a collector investor space in Magic, I kept laughing when my coworkers would be talking about like going somewhere to play Magic and like buying the new sets. I was like, guys, don't you realize like Magic 30th anniversary killed Magic? It's over. Like, why are you playing? And they're just like, what are you talking about, dude? It's a great game. We're playing with our friends. We love it. So there is sort of the bubble of collector sphere that views it that way, and everyone else is just like playing the game like they always have, you know?
Yes, I do.
Is that sensible commentary at all? Like,
so you did your best. No. With Magic in particular, it is weird to your point, because I don't have a TV show drawing me into it. I don't have a video game drawing me into it. I don't have anything drawing me into it, really. Now, if I played Magic the Gathering, I understand it's a heavy players dominant game, and that's great. That's awesome. But to your point, just knowing like the life cycle of the average player is around 2 years for Magic, that's interesting too. I mean, you have to eventually, like after 30 years, you have to start considering like literally population count, what countries are getting into Magic the Gathering. I don't know any of that data. I haven't looked into that. I'm not as interested, especially just due to the historical performance of Magic the Gathering as well. I would much rather just invest in the stock market than Magic, but that's me. And I don't just have that passion for Magic too. I would be more willing to put money into something speculative and that historically might not do quite as well as like investing in stocks if I really, really enjoy it. Something like Pokemon, for example, or some other, name a new game that I might be interested in. So that's what I would have to say about that.
Here's a thought that just occurred to me, tying the two themes together a little bit: serialized cards and a junk wax era. I'm not a scholar of the sports card scene, but I do feel like serialized cards and taking that approach was partly their solution to just the utterly obnoxious supply that was being generated across that industry, to create a sense of like rarity and desirability in an otherwise enormous volume of product being manufactured. What do you think about that kind of solution to an otherwise junk wax era for something like Pokemon, where instead of, I don't know, restricting supply, they still print to meet demand, but you maintain some chase and scarcity and really high desirability via the serialized product? And so even if it's a junk wax era, it could counter what would otherwise maybe diminish the desirability of the product.
No, I do like that. To your point, I mean, that's a lot of what happened on the sports card side. And before I forget this point, on the sports card side, this is just me, so anecdote here, but I I really like the idea of getting into sports cards, and I have some sports cards that I just bought for me, not to speculate in really, but I can't get into it because there are so many parallels and refractors, and even when I genuinely try and I read guides online and I'm watching YouTube videos, there's always a new green prism or whatever it is, and I find it difficult to keep up with that.
We all
And
know you're a pink refractor kind of guy.
I do have a pink Christian McCaffrey refractor, and I do like that. But I can't get into it, man. And so I know, and I have quite a few friends, and again, this is anecdotal, but I know, again, I'm not that special in that I know I'm not alone, and I don't know what that looks like. The sports card market is obviously humongous, so it doesn't matter as much. But on the Pokemon side, so what would I expect if they did something like that? One, I think that's really interesting. Two, inevitably, you're going to have stonkers who are going to want to chase whatever that set where multiple sets are. So that would bring value there. My thinking is, let's just assume I'm right and that we are in a little bit of a junk wax era.
Yeah.
If we are, 10 years from now, 15, 20 years from now, when people look back on these sets and they kind of cringe a little bit and they're like, ooh, Vivid Voltage, I don't really want that. That was printed heavily, or Battle Styles, like, I don't really want to, jump onto that. But if, successive sets now, whatever comes out in Scarlet and Violet, we see like the first one of one, maybe toward the tail end of Scarlet and Violet or something, I don't know. Will these other sets in the meantime, like Shining Fates especially, anything like that was printed a bit more and that's cooled off now, do I see people like revisiting this enough, like to where it makes it like justifiable to invest heavily in something like that? I do think so, like especially on the sealed side, but I'm talking about like with the cards specifically, like the chase cards of these sets, the one of ones, one of tens or whatever, I think those will do very, very well. I don't think as well as like if you would have bought into like vintage at good prices or something related. But I do think like especially the first couple of waves of 101s and that, if you can get it, or if you're lucky enough to pull it yourself, I think that would perform really well and that would definitely drive demand up. But if we're in a junk wax era right now and we further layer on top a bunch of outside stonkers, like for example, I don't do anything. I don't dabble with Magic the Gathering.
Right.
But I would have been interested if I could have bought like the one of one ring if it wasn't a stupid price, in my opinion.
Right.
So would that further drive speculative demand? Yes, I think so. So there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah. I think there is. And there's definitely something to be said that layering on these kind of gimmicky set design features like a serialized one of one special card is going to drive demand, a lot of purchases, as it did, or it certainly has the potential to. I shouldn't say it is guaranteed to, has potential to, did for Magic the Gathering. But how much of that demand was actually organic, authentic demand of fans of Magic being excited to open packs again for a new reason versus how much of that was speculative money that is literally creating the bubble in just participating in that market, right? And I don't know. I'll admit, so I opened with my hot take was that I hate the idea of serialized cards in Pokemon. It kind of rubs me the wrong way. It doesn't make me too excited or enthusiastic, but I think it might work. And that's a reaction to watching the market respond to the One Ring being found. I thought for sure the boxes were doing well. They were going crazy. Everyone was hunting for the One Ring. Prices got a little wild. I thought as soon as that ring was found, the prices would just tank, like not just back to normal, but like below normal. And they've adjusted for sure, but they haven't tanked. Like it's dropped a bunch, which makes sense, but maybe it's like 20% or something like that. And like the boxes were already more than 20% over what you might expect. So it's kind of stabilized in a healthy spot. So far, I don't know how it's going to play out from here. It could continue to go down, but it's not crashing. It's not like devastating the market. If you bought those boxes at peak prices, before the ring was found, you're not exactly happy. But I don't know. It seems surprisingly fine, all things considered. And so that's given me a different perspective on what it could do for Pokemon as well. I think the one of one serialized ring is a unique gimmick that puts particular emphasis and price appreciation on the product until it's found, and then that one card is going to affect the market drastically. If you have one of hundreds, maybe multiple one of hundreds, I don't know how many people are going to know, like, have all 100 been pulled. There's always going to be that idea potentially that every box could still have something like that in it that might help maintain some more desirability over time. I still don't want them to do it, but it could work. I could see it working. I think what made Evolving Skies partly so successful was the chase for the Moonbryon. And as the products, as they print more, how do you continue to maintain chase while still providing what they're doing now in Scarlet and Violet with beautiful art variants, a lot of different rarities, but a lot of desirable cards that a lot of people would like. But people complain about the pull rates, how easy things are to pull. You layer in that chase component on top, don't do anything differently, throw a couple serialized cards in, you get the best of both worlds. You get that lottery chase that drives a lot of excitement for a lot of people, but opening the product doesn't totally suck because you're still pulling interesting, fun cards. Maybe that is the future, you know? That's my concluding, looping it all back. That's the conclusion of my take. What do you think, Zach?
Thank God. No, I'm just like bashing you this episode. I like it. No, it's what do they say? That's like my coping mechanism or something. But I that's a great take. I agree with a lot of those points. That it could drive desirability. I am also in the camp right now. Pokemon clearly doesn't need to do serialized cards, and I wonder, not really wonder, they absolutely had to have considered this already.
For sure.
I would be shocked if they haven't. So I think it's an inevitability, but I wonder if it's hey, you know, the last 3 quarters in a row, you know, guys, we've seen, you know, negative returns, you know, month over month over month, or something like that. We've got to pull something out of the hat here. We have to come up with a all exclusive Charizard Paradise set where it's just 50 different Charizard variations, or like a bunch of 1 of 10 cards, or whatever the case. So I think they definitely have that in their back pocket, and I have no idea if or when they would implement something like that, but clearly they don't need it right now. So I think they would be beyond foolish to implement something like that, especially when there is more supply right now. And what's interesting is, like, for example, I'm looking at base set Raichu, unlimited hollows in PSA 10. There are 239 of those guys out there. You know, you can get them. I think they're actually listed for just over $1,000 online, but you were able to scoop them up a little bit below that in the meantime. So again, it kind of goes back to, like, and there's a Giratina during the Platinum era as well, where it's got a pop count of 6.
Crazy.
And again, are people going to revisit that specific Giratina? Maybe, maybe not. My hesitancy around all of this is, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, is I don't know, and it's my understanding that a lot of other hobbies, collectible hobbies, people always gravitate toward the older stuff, and Pokemon is really, really top heavy right now. I think a lot of it is genuine, and I think a lot more of it will continue to be genuine. Again, we talked about this on our first episode with Pokemon being introduced into mainland China. That's a massive, massive deal, and I still think it's incredibly understated. So I think that absolutely helps. But we are seeing more product right now. Again, I mean, Shining Fates, I feel like, is a decent recent example that we've seen. It's like you just see ETBs all over the place now, whereas you couldn't get your hands on it at first. You have seen that set fatigue, and you see, I don't even know how many thousands of those Charizards are out there now. when, like, for example, I always like to exaggerate to make a point. That illustration Charizard, that Grand Prix Charizard, there's over 20,000 of those in a PSA 10 right now. Those will never be worth anything.
Yeah.
They can't be. So
Mhm.
so if that's like our number right now, like given the current market conditions, if that's the number right now, and if we're seeing thousands of like the shiny Charizard vmaxes graded, we're seeing thousands of the Moonbryons, and we're seeing again base set hollow, like not no name Pokemon like Raichus and the like, going for around $1,000. When you see a pop count of just a couple hundred. What's your take on that again? Because I think goes back to the whole junk wax era, and that I think it's too top heavy, man. What do you think?
I agree with you. I love modern cards. I think they're doing an amazing job designing incredible cards that I'm super excited to collect and own. I'm really, really enthusiastic about what Pokemon Company is doing right now. The caveat to that is that when you look at prices of the modern cards and the modern collectibles versus some of the historical ones, and a lot of really old, really, really special cards that are in low supply, both because condition rarity is a much bigger thing with the older cards, and because they just didn't print nearly as much to begin with, especially during those eras when the hobby was kind of dead. Those all feel undervalued to me. And I think the point you were making earlier about in most collectible hobbies, older stuff tends to become worth more and more desirable, especially over time. I think the reality is that history and the historical role that collectibles played in their hobbies tends to outweigh hype or just short-term like demand or attention. So I tend to agree with you. I think the question is over time, how much attention is lost off the modern cards as new modern cards come out and are probably going to continue to be exceptional. And as that happens, what does that mean for the cards we're collecting now? And does some of the attention continue to pile towards the historical cards? I'm not sure. I definitely think it's possible. I just also think there's so many of those old cards. Like, who knows which ones people will gravitate to and when, or if ever. I think like base set and Jungle Fossil, Team Rocket, those will always have quite a bit of attention. But there's that weird gap. Kind of late WotC gets a lot of attention for a reason. I guess it's really the sort of post WotC that's only started to really grow. And several years after that, you get into that new realm of weird, not quite vintage, not quite modern, in between stuff. So that's my take. I think I'm agreeing with you basically. This is where we leave the spiciest comments of all, right? This is how we close it out.
I wanted to play a little fun game with you right now. So, like, for example, I'm just looking online. Shiny Charizard VMAX, just because I was mentioning it. It's more than I remembered. It's 12,700 PSA 10s. Okay.
Yeah.
So 84% PSA 10 chance. Right now they're floating at around $200 in a PSA 10. The market cap for it is 46, man. For the shiny Charizard VMAX. So, like, my genuine question for you: would you buy this card right now to stonk? Why or why not?
No, not at all. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with you fully. I own this card. I paid way too much for it. I love it. It's beautiful. It's an amazing card. I'm really glad I own it. But no, I'm not throwing a bunch of resources behind that card in the hopes that it's gonna double or triple in value. Like, yeah, if it's the perfect candidate to just slowly depreciate in value because there's just so much of it and people increasingly like, I don't need to hold on to this or
sure. And the market is obviously still finding out. Like, if you look at any graph, even on TCG Player, eBay, the graph is just slowly dying. But
yeah,
would you well, maybe it's a silly question. Would you be, I wouldn't say would you rather, because I'm sure you can correct me if I'm wrong. Would you rather buy like Shining Fates ETBs, for example? But would you like putting money in Shining Fates ETBs right now? Or what's your sentiment for that, I guess, because that's sealed?
Yeah, I feel better about the ETBs. I also own a decent amount of them already. Yeah, they were just printed to oblivion, completely overprinted unnecessarily. I kept buying them when they were still above MSRP. Every time they popped up on the Pokemon Center and in Canada, sometimes we have a little more time to snag things off the Pokemon Center in Canada. Sometimes. So as they popped up, I just buy 4 more, which is the max you could order. I just did that a couple times as they popped up while they were still hard to find everywhere else. And then eventually they stopped being hard to find, and that MSRP price didn't look so good anymore. And I don't think they've I think they're hovering around MSRP, if I remember correctly, but they haven't quite gotten past it. I still think it was a really fun set to open. Like I like the baby shinies. The Charizard VMAX is great. I prefer Shiny Star V, the Japanese version, because they kept the Shiny Charizard V in it. They also have the Marnie that was released in the Marnie Milk Box set internationally, but that Marnie is another chase in Shiny Star V. So you have a couple similar set design, a couple more hits. But I still like Shining Fates, but I just don't think, I think they printed too much. I think if it's just going to have a gradual lift over time, and there will be select people who like that shiny style of Hidden Fates, Shining Fates, and think it's cool and want to collect it. And I don't think it's going to be a major force or a major product in the hobby for a very, very long time, if ever. So that's my take. How about you?
No, that's a great take. Sorry, I lost it there for a minute because me and my buddies, we call them Marnie Milkers in the milk cartons.
All right, so that's what we want people to comment, right? Leave a comment, Marnie Milkers, if you made it to the end with us.
That's my input for you. I think people know, just like how I got things kicked off here. I would not be buying. Man, gosh, this card probably could have done well. Even mid to long term, they just printed way too much of it. Stinks. Still a really good set, lots of fun. I would not be buying the Shiny Charizard VMAX to stonk with. I would definitely feel perfectly comfortable, actually. Even though there's a lot of them, I'd be perfectly comfortable holding Shiny Fates ETBs. We have historically seen over a longer-ish period of time, 5, 7, 8, 9 years, you start seeing pretty much any set across the board go up over time. So even with as much as what there was for Shining Fates, especially nowadays, the internet does help with that, with people ripping and shipping. So that would be my input there.
Cool. All right. I think that could be a good place to end it.
I agree. Do we have an outro? Do we need to do an outro yet?
What did we do last? I don't even remember what I did last time, to be honest.
Thanks for watching. Sub to Gray.
Yeah, the outro was, well, my name's Gray and I can do the Truffle Shuffle, and you've been watching the Market Shuffle. Actually, I know what the Truffle Shuffle is from. I don't know what the Truffle Shuffle is. I don't know if I actually can do it, but so it's a bit of a lie. So I'm lying to our audience right now, but that's fine.
Guys, if you made it this far now, no, you gotta ask for Gray to do the Truffle Shuffle in the next video. We talk about if Pokemon's in junk bags here. That's it. All right, I'll be more enthusiastic though. We can vote. Well, actually, that'd be hilarious if you used that.
You never know.